He hadn't spoken to anyone in 3 days, and when he finally did, it wasn't to another person, it was to himself, whispering a prayer he no longer believed in. Elias Marino used to build houses. Now, he slept beneath them, under the iron belly of a city that had already forgotten his name. The bridge above him moaned each time the wind pushed through. Rainwater dripped between the cracks, pooling beside his worn-out boots. In that puddle, he could see the man he had become: gray skin, hollow eyes, and a face that no longer belonged to him. The nights had started turning colder again. He wrapped himself in a coat someone else had thrown away, a reminder that what one man discards, another wears to survive. The city roared around him, sirens, trains, voices, all moving forward while he stayed behind. He wasn't used to silence, but lately, silence was safer than being seen. He had been limping for days. The pain in his foot had started as a small sting, the kind you ignore because you have bigger things to worry about, like hunger or finding a dry place to sleep. But pain has a way of growing louder when you have no one left to talk to. He sat under the flickering streetlight, tucked off his boot, and froze. The smell hit first like iron, like rot, like something that shouldn't exist. The skin around the wound was swollen, dark, glistening. He pressed the edge of it, and something moved. He dropped his foot instantly, the air catching in his throat. No, he must have imagined it. Maybe it was just the fever, or the lack of food. He pressed again. Movement. Slow. Wet. Real. The scream that left his mouth wasn't loud enough for anyone to hear. Not in a city that had already learned how to tune out the cries of the forgotten. A car passed by. Then another. No one looked. No one ever looked. He tried to clean it with what was left in his bottle, but the water only made the pain burn deeper. The wound pulsed, each beat of his heart echoing inside it. He wrapped it in a dirty piece of cloth and prayed for morning. When the sun finally crawled up behind the buildings, Elias could barely move his leg. His foot had turned the color of dusk purple and black, fading into red. He thought about walking to the clinic 2 blocks away, but he'd already tried that once. They asked for ID. Insurance. A name that still meant something. He had none of those. He turned back toward the bridge. By afternoon, the fever had come. He could taste metal in his mouth, like rust and regret. His thoughts began to blur, the noise of the street melting into the hum of his own heartbeat. Sometimes he thought he heard voices whispering his name, but when he looked around, there was only the city staring back. He found a corner near the alley behind the liquor store and sat down. That place used to be full of people once: music, laughter, bad decisions. Now it was just him, the rain, and the slow, wet pulse coming from his foot. He pulled the cloth away, and the sight made his stomach twist. The skin was open now, raw, shimmering under the dim light. Something inside it glistened and shifted like it was breathing. He stared for a long time. He wanted to believe it was his mind playing tricks, but deep down he knew something was living inside him. Something the city had given him in return for all it had taken away. He pressed the cloth back against it and bit his tongue until he tasted blood. He closed his eyes, waiting for it all to stop: the pain, the hunger, the noise. But it didn't. And when he finally fell asleep, the city around him seemed to breathe in rhythm with his wound. The rain slowed. The bridge above him creaked. Somewhere in the distance, a train passed by, howling like a dying animal. And when the sound faded, Elias realized something that froze his heart completely. The pulsing he heard wasn't coming from his chest anymore. It was coming from his foot, and it was getting stronger. The second night was worse. The fever had climbed higher, crawling behind his eyes like fire. Elias woke up drenched in sweat, shivering and burning at the same time. The rain had stopped, but the air under the bridge felt heavy, thick, almost unbreathable. He tried to stand, but his right leg wouldn't obey. Each time he moved it, the pain stabbed through him like a knife dragged across bone. He rolled up his pant leg, and what he saw made him forget how to breathe. The wound had opened wider. The skin was no longer skin, it was gray, torn, eaten. Something glimmered faintly inside, like pearls buried in meat. For a moment, he couldn't look away. It was mesmerizing in the worst way possible. The kind of thing your mind refuses to accept as real, even as your body feels it. He wanted to tear it out. Whatever it was, whatever had made its home inside him. He searched through his backpack until he found a bent metal spoon. He heated it over a lighter until the edge glowed faintly orange, then pressed it against his leg. The hiss of burning flesh filled the silence under the bridge. He didn't scream. He just bit his fist until he tasted iron again. When he pulled the spoon away, the wound smoked, but it didn't stop moving. It twitched slowly, calmly, as if whatever was inside didn't fear the flame at all. That's when the laughter started. Not out loud, not from anyone nearby. It was somewhere inside his head, his own voice, broken in two. The fever had started to speak. He crawled out from under the bridge, dragging his bag behind him. The city above him was awake now. Buses screeching, horns echoing, people shouting over the sound of their own lives. He limped toward the main street, keeping his hood low. He didn't want anyone to see him. He didn't want to be seen like this, but it was too late for that. People looked at him and turned away. A woman crossed the street when she saw him coming. A man muttered something under his breath and walked faster. He had never felt more visible in his life and more unwanted. By the time he reached the corner store, his foot was leaving streaks of blood on the pavement. He leaned against the wall and begged the clerk for water. The man behind the glass just shook his head. No loitering, Elias smiled, though it wasn't really a smile. It was the reflex of a man who'd forgotten what human kindness felt like. He walked again until the world tilted sideways. The buildings wavered, the street curved, and the colors began to bleed into one another. He collapsed near a dumpster, head spinning, heartbeat pounding in his ears. Everything smelled like rot, and underneath that smell, something else, sweet, faintly sweet, like decay trying to disguise itself as life. He looked down, and the cloth wrapped around his foot had come loose. He peeled it back with trembling hands. The wound was alive. Tiny white shapes moved inside the meat, twisting, writhing, feeding. He blinked, hoping it was the fever, the hunger, the madness, but it wasn't. They were real, dozens of them, maybe more. He fell backward, choking on bile, his mind splitting between horror and disbelief. He slammed his foot against the ground, again and again, trying to crush what couldn't be crushed. But they only burrowed deeper, disappearing under the flesh. He sobbed without sound, shaking so hard his teeth rattled. He wasn't afraid of dying anymore. He was afraid of what he'd become before he did. The city's noise seemed to fade until there was only the sound of breathing, his, ragged and desperate, and something else, a faint hum, like 100 whispers vibrating beneath his skin. He pressed his palms over his ears, but the sound was inside him. He could feel it in his bones. Each tiny movement beneath the wound pulsed like a heartbeat, and in that moment, he realized something that made his blood run cold. They weren't feeding on him. They were keeping him alive. He looked up at the sky, mouth open, eyes wide, trembling from fever and terror, rain beginning to fall again. The drops mixed with his tears, and for the first time in his life, Elias prayed, not for help, not for forgiveness, but for silence, because whatever was growing inside him had started to breathe. The hospital was quiet that night, too quiet. Even the machines seemed to hum softer, like they didn't want to disturb what lingered in that room. Elias lay awake, his eyes fixed on the ceiling's pale glow. He counted the tiles above him, 47. He whispered the number again and again, as if it might mean something. He hadn't spoken to anyone since the morning. Leah had checked on him twice, her voice gentle, her words distant. Dr. Patel came once, brief, clinical, like a man inspecting a broken machine. He said the infection had stopped spreading. He called it a miracle. Elias didn't believe in miracles. Not anymore. When they left, the silence returned, and in that silence, the whispers began. At first, it was just the sound of air moving through vents or maybe the slow hum of electricity in the walls. But soon, it took shape. It became voices, dozens of them, soft, layered, They didn't speak words, not exactly. They breathed. He turned his head toward the bandaged leg. Every breath he heard seemed to come from there. He sat up, his hands shaking. The pain burned like fire, but the fear was worse. He tore at the edge of the bandage, fingers trembling. Leah's voice echoed in his head. Don't move. You're safe now. But safety was a luxury for the living. The fabric peeled away slowly, the adhesive tugging at skin, pulling tiny hairs, releasing the faint smell of rot and medicine. Underneath, the wound glistened wet and red. It looked cleaner but wrong. The skin seemed to move on its own. Tiny ripples, like breath under water. He blinked hard, his stomach twisting. And then he saw its small white shapes, nestled deep, pulsing softly like tiny lungs. They weren't gone. They had multiplied. He gripped the sheets, teeth grinding, eyes wide with disbelief. He wanted to scream, but his throat locked. He wanted to tear them out, but fear pinned him down. His heart pounded so hard the room seemed to shake. He grabbed the scissors from the tray beside his bed. They were small, too small for what he was about to do, but they gleamed under the fluorescent light like the only truth left in the world. He pressed the cold metal against his skin and whispered, I can't let you stay. Before the first cut, the door opened. Leah stepped in, her face caught in the thin light of the doorway. She froze when she saw him. Elias, stop. He didn't hear her. The sound of his own pulse drowned everything out. He pressed down. Pain exploded through his body like a shockwave. Leah rushed forward, grabbing his hand. The scissors clattered to the floor. He collapsed back against the bed, sobbing, shaking, caught somewhere between agony and terror. Leah pressed the call button, shouting for help, her voice breaking. Within seconds, the room filled with bodies, nurses, doctors, hands holding him down, voices blurring into white noise. He felt the sting of a needle in his arm, the cold flood of sedation crawling through his veins. His vision began to fade, and as the world went soft and distant, he looked at Leah one last time. Her face hovered above him, eyes full of something he hadn't seen in years. Mercy. He tried to speak, but the words came out in fragments. They're not dying. Leah leaned closer. What? Elias blinked. The world slipped sideways, his voice barely a breath. They're breathing. The lights overhead flickered. For a moment, the whole hospital seemed to exhale. And then everything went dark. When Elias woke, the world was quiet again. The machines beeped softly, the smell of antiseptic still sharp in the air. He turned his head, the bandages were gone. Fresh ones replaced them, tighter, cleaner, perfect. He looked toward the window. Rain again. Always rain. The city lights shimmered through the droplets, reflecting 1,000 tiny worlds. He wondered if any of them remembered him, if any of them even knew he existed. He closed his eyes, and in the silence that followed, he felt it again, the faintest pulse beneath the bandages. Not pain, not infection, just rhythm. Steady, soft, alive. He whispered to no one, then it's true. The machines around him hummed in unison, syncing to his heartbeat. And for a second, the entire room seemed to breathe. The rain hadn't stopped. It hadn't even changed. Same rhythm, same sound. Like the sky itself was stuck in a loop, replaying a moment that refused to end. Elias walked barefoot through the alley behind the hospital, the bandages gone, his hospital gown clinging to him like wet paper. The city was half asleep, neon bleeding into puddles, the smell of smoke and oil blending with rain. He didn't know how long he'd been walking. Time had stopped meaning anything. He kept his hand pressed to his leg, feeling the faint pulse beneath. It didn't hurt anymore. That was the strange part. It didn't even feel infected. It felt alive. At every step, he swore the ground trembled beneath him, soft vibrations crawling through the pavement, echoing faintly in his bones. It was as if the heartbeat inside his leg had synced with something larger, something beneath the city itself. He stopped under the yellow flicker of a streetlight. The rain shimmered like glass around him. And for a moment, he thought he could hear breathing, not his, not human, but the slow, deep exhale of something vast, ancient, sleeping beneath the concrete. He looked down. Water pooled around his feet, swirling slightly, as if being drawn toward him. The reflection staring back from the puddle wasn't his. The eyes were darker, the veins faintly golden, pulsing in rhythm with that invisible heartbeat. He stumbled back, breath short, hands trembling. "What's happening to me?" he whispered. But no one answered. Only the city did. A faint flicker rolled through the streetlights one by one, down the block, a wave of power that pulsed like blood through arteries of steel and wire. The hum of distant traffic faded. The sound of the rain deepened, heavier now, falling in sync with the rhythm in his leg. He turned toward the hospital. The windows glowed dimly in the distance, white light flickering behind glass. He could see movement silhouettes rushing, searching. They were looking for him. Leah. She was probably among them. He pictured her face, the way she had looked at him, not with fear but pity, as if he were something fragile, broken. He wanted to tell her it wasn't pity he needed, it was understanding, someone to believe what he now knew to be true. He walked toward the main road, limping slightly, leaving faint streaks of red water behind him. The rain washed them away almost instantly, but it didn't matter. The city would remember. He could feel it now beneath his skin, beneath the asphalt, the pulse of something enormous. A connection, like veins branching from him into everything else. A siren wailed somewhere in the distance. It didn't sound mechanical anymore. It sounded alive. He reached an intersection and stopped. The lights above flickered red, yellow, then died completely. The whole block went dark. In the silence that followed, the only sound was the faint hum beneath the street. He knelt slowly, pressing his palm against the wet pavement. It was warm, faintly vibrating, and when he leaned close enough, he could hear it, that same whisper he'd heard under the hospital, behind his eyelids, in his fever dreams. But now, it wasn't a whisper, it was a voice, and it was calling his name. Elias. He froze. The voice was calm, almost kind, familiar. He didn't know why, but it sounded like Leah. He looked around, empty street, flickering light, rain thick as mist. No one was there. Still, the voice came again. "Elias, you can't run from what's already inside you." He pressed his hand harder against the ground, jaw clenched. The pavement pulsed in time with his heartbeat. The rain slowed, almost pausing in midair. He whispered back, trembling, "What do you want from me?" The answer came like a breath through the storm. "Not to die. Alone." Something cracked. Not in the sky in him. His chest tightened, his vision blurred. He fell to his knees, clutching his stomach as if something inside was shifting. The pulse in his legs spread upward, climbing like vines beneath the skin, wrapping around his ribs, his arms, his neck. He gasped, body shaking violently. He tried to scream, but the rain swallowed his voice. And then silence. When he opened his eyes, the world had changed. The rain had stopped mid-fall, droplets suspended in air like glass beads. The streetlights burned gold, their glow bending, breathing. He looked down, the veins on his arms shimmered faintly, alive with light. He was still Elias, but not just Elias anymore. He felt the heartbeat of the entire city inside him, the hum of power lines, the rhythm of passing trains, the thunder of 1,000 footsteps above ground. He could feel them all, every living pulse, every quiet death. And then he heard her again, the voice, closer now, behind him. "Elias." He turned slowly. Leah stood in the street, soaked to the bone, eyes wide, terrified and mesmerized all at once. The light reflected off the rain between them like glass threads. "Elias," she whispered, "what have you done?" He smiled faintly, not in madness, but in clarity. And when he spoke, his voice carried the hum of the city itself. "I listened." The city didn't sleep anymore. By dawn, every streetlight in a 30-block radius flickered in the same rhythm, steady, alive, identical to a heartbeat. The news called it a grid malfunction. The people called it a storm glitch. But Leah knew better. She hadn't gone home. She hadn't even changed her clothes. Her scrubs were still soaked from the night before, the edges stiff with dried rain. She stood at the hospital window, looking out over the skyline, watching the lights breathe. She counted them once, every pulse matching the same frequency she'd heard on Elias's monitor before he vanished. She whispered to herself, "This is impossible." But she said it again and again, like a prayer, as if repetition might make it untrue. Down below, the city buzzed. Traffic lights blinked red all at once, every crossing locking into perfect rhythm. Street lamps pulsed, synchronized, like veins under skin. Even the hum of the hospital machines seemed to follow that same slow, heavy beat. Leah pressed her hand to her chest. She could feel it there too. She turned to Dr. Patel. He'd been pacing, phone in hand, shouting at someone on the other end. City officials, most likely. "They say it's a power surge," he said. "A feedback loop from the east grid. But that doesn't explain why the heart monitors are syncing to it." Leah hesitated. "There's something else," she whispered. Patel frowned. "What do you mean?" She took a deep breath. "When I changed Elias's bandages, I saw something." Her voice cracked. It looked organic, like it was breathing. Patel stared at her, waiting for a punchline. There wasn't one. Before he could respond, the lights above them dimmed. The monitors in the ICU flashed once, twice, and then began to beat in unison. Beep, beep, beep. The sound rolled down the hallway like thunder in a tunnel. Every patient monitor, every defibrillator, every machine with a pulse or current began to follow the same rhythm. It wasn't random. It was deliberate, coordinated. Patel's phone slipped from his hand. The building itself seemed to vibrate. Leah pressed her palms over her ears, tears streaming down her face. "Elias," she whispered. "What did you do?" Miles away, in the heart of the city, Elias stood on a rooftop. The skyline glowed faintly beneath him, gold veins running through glass and concrete, like arteries illuminated from within. He could hear everything. Engines revving, sirens crying, children laughing. Every sound fed into the rhythm he now carried inside him. He didn't feel cold anymore, didn't feel pain, just connection. He looked down at his arms, the faint shimmer beneath the skin still pulsing, golden and soft. Each beat matched the flicker of lights across the buildings below. He realized he could control it with a thought, a breath, a heartbeat. He inhaled deeply. The lights across the city dimmed. He exhaled. They flared bright, like dawn breaking all at once. He smiled faintly, whispering, "It's alive." But with every breath, the pulse grew heavier, as if something inside the city was breathing with him, and every exhale drew him deeper into its core. He stumbled backward, gripping the railing, his head pounding with voices, thousands of them, not words, feelings, pain, fear, hunger, every emotion bleeding through the concrete, traveling through cables and steel like veins. He fell to his knees, gasping. "What are you?" he shouted into the wind. The answer came through every window, every neon sign, every trembling light. "We are what you left behind." He covered his ears. "No, no, I didn't mean you brought us back." The voice was layered, countless, an echo of every life he had ever touched or failed to save. He staggered up, trembling, rain beginning to fall again, heavier this time. The drops hit the roof like small detonations. He could see movement below, people emerging from buildings, looking up, their faces lit by the strange golden pulse. For a moment, he thought he saw their eyes glowing faintly too. He backed away, breath short. "I didn't want this." The voice inside him, calm, eternal, replied, "You wanted to be remembered." He froze. The truth hit him harder than any infection ever could. He had prayed for meaning, begged the world not to forget him, and now, the city itself had answered, at a cost. He turned toward the horizon. In the distance, he could see the hospital, Leah's window still faintly lit. He could almost feel her heartbeat from there, merging with his own. It was faint, fragile, human. He wanted to go back. He wanted to undo what he'd done. But as he took a step forward, he felt resistance, like invisible hands holding him back. He looked down. From beneath his feet, tiny veins of golden light spread outward across the rooftop, branching like roots through the cracks of concrete. They pulsed in sync with his heart. He tried to lift his foot, it didn't move. He was part of it now. The city wasn't following him anymore. It was keeping him. He fell to his knees, screaming into the rain, "Please, let me go." But the city didn't answer this time. It only breathed. And beneath the thunder, somewhere deep below, he heard the heartbeat again, slower now, deeper, like the world itself was falling asleep, beating not just for him, but because of him. The rain had stopped, but the city still glowed like a dying ember. From the hospital roof, Leah could see it, a golden shimmer stretched across the skyline, faint but steady, pulsing like a heartbeat too big for the earth to hold. She hadn't slept in 2 days. Coffee no longer worked. Prayers no longer helped. All she had left was the noise, that deep, endless hum beneath her feet, constant as blood, quiet as guilt. She looked down at her hands. They trembled, not from exhaustion, but because she could feel the rhythm there too. Every time her pulse jumped, the streetlights below flickered in answer. Every time she took a breath, the glow across the skyline seemed to shift, like it was waiting for her. Elias. It had to be Elias. She had been running on the same thoughts since the moment he vanished. He isn't gone. Not dead. Not lost. Just somewhere else. Connected. And she was right. She had to be. When the first blackout hit the city center, Leah grabbed her coat and left the hospital. Dr. Patel shouted after her something about protocols, danger, contamination. But his words didn't matter anymore. Nothing did, except the pull. The streets were empty. Even the sirens had stopped. Only the golden veins of light ran through the cracks of the pavement, glowing faintly like veins under translucent skin. She followed them. Each step echoed. Each echo answered. She realized, somewhere between fear and faith, that the city was breathing slow and deep, like a sleeping giant. The light pulsed once every 5 seconds. She matched her steps to it. Down an alley, across a bridge slick with rain, through intersections where every traffic light blinked in perfect unison. Everything alive, everything listening. When she reached the industrial district, the glow grew stronger. The factories there had been abandoned for years, left to rust beside the river. But tonight, they pulsed like living organs, steam rising from broken pipes, walls trembling with something inside. She stopped in front of a warehouse, massive, dark, humming softly. Elias, her voice was small, swallowed by the storm-soaked air. No answer, just the hum. She pushed open the door. The air inside was thick, metallic, and hot. Golden light seeped through cracks in the concrete floor. Cables hung from the ceiling like veins torn loose. Machines flickered, dead but twitching, as if trying to remember how to live. And then she saw him. He stood at the center of the room, bare feet on the glowing floor, arms hanging limply by his sides. The light crawled up his skin, alive beneath the surface. He wasn't bleeding anymore. He wasn't decaying. He was pulsing. "Elias," she whispered. He turned slowly, his eyes reflecting the light gold where there should have been white, dark where there should have been life. But he smiled, softly, sadly. "You came," he said. His voice was low, distorted by the hum around them. "I didn't think you would." She took a step closer. The floor rippled under her shoes like water. "I had to. You disappeared. The lights, the city, it's all because of me," he finished. His tone wasn't proud. It was resigned. He looked down at his hands. They glowed faintly, tiny pulses running along the veins. "I didn't mean to. I thought I was dying. I thought, if I could hold on, maybe something good would come from it. Maybe I could be useful again." Tears blurred Leah's vision. "Elias, you have to stop this. Whatever this is, it's killing the city." "It's killing you," he smiled again, faint and broken. "I can't stop it." "I am it." The hum grew louder, vibrating through the walls, through the air. Leah stepped forward until she was right in front of him. She reached for his hand. It was warm to warm, and the moment her fingers touched his, the room filled with light. For a second, she saw everything. The hospital, the streets, every heartbeat, every person, every life, all connected, all pulsing through Elias. And then she felt the truth. He wasn't just part of the city. He was keeping it alive. The infection that should have killed him had turned into something else, a signal, a bridge between human and machine, blood and wire. His body had become the conduit. Leah gasped, pulling her hand back, trembling. Elias, if you keep this going, I know, he interrupted softly. His eyes shimmered, wet and luminous. It'll burn me out, but if I stop, they all go dark. He turned away from her, looking toward the broken windows. The storm outside was returning, thunder rolling like an angry heartbeat. I can feel them, he whispered. The patients, the children in the wards, the people who still believe tomorrow might come. They're all connected. They're all alive because of this. Leah stepped forward, shaking her head, tears spilling freely now. That's not living, Elias. That's surviving. And it's killing you. He turned to her one last time, the light flickering in his chest. Maybe that's the point. The glow around them brightened, swallowing the room in gold. Machines began to hum louder, vibrating so hard the walls cracked. Leah screamed over the noise, Elias, please, let me help you. He smiled gently the same way he used to when calming a dying patient. You already did. The light flared so bright it turned everything white. And then silence. Leah opened her eyes. She was standing alone. The floor was cold again. The lights were dead. The hum was gone. But the city was still breathing. For 3 days, the city glowed. Not brightly, not like before. Just enough to keep the streets from falling completely into darkness. Enough to remind people that something had happened here. Something they couldn't explain, but would never forget. Leah hadn't left the hospital since the night the hum stopped. Every room felt haunted by his absence and yet, by his presence. It was in the flicker of the monitors, in the way the air conditioner breathed, in the slow, almost human rhythm of the elevators coming to life each morning. Every sound reminded her that the world was still moving because someone had given everything to keep it that way. She walked through the corridors in silence, her reflection following her in the polished floors. Sometimes she swore she saw him, a flicker of a white coat disappearing around a corner, the faint echo of his footsteps keeping pace with hers. She didn't chase them anymore. She knew he wasn't gone. Not entirely. The hospital had changed since that night. The lights no longer buzzed. The machines no longer glitched. They simply breathed. Each monitor seemed to hum in the same soft rhythm, not mechanical, not artificial, but warm, alive. As though the entire building had inherited something human. Leah stopped in the ICU, the same room where Elias had once lain dying. The bed was empty now. The same rain drummed softly against the window, and for a moment she thought she could almost hear the faint whisper of his voice. Keep going, she smiled faintly through tears. I'm trying, she whispered back. That afternoon, the mayor gave a press conference. They called it the Great Power Phenomenon. A spontaneous electromagnetic surge across several miles of the urban grid, likely caused by an unknown atmospheric anomaly. No casualties, minimal damage, no explanation. The reporters called it a miracle. The scientists called it a mystery. But Leah called it something else, a gift. She never mentioned Elias. His file remained sealed, marked deceased cardiac arrest. No one questioned it. No one knew the truth that the man they'd all forgotten had become the very pulse that kept them alive. Still, when the lights flickered that night just once, everyone in the hospital paused. It wasn't the harsh jolt of a malfunction. It was gentle, almost affectionate, as if the city itself had exhaled. A week later, Leah walked out onto the hospital roof at dawn. The storm had finally passed. For the first time in weeks, the sky was clear, streaks of orange and silver brushing against the horizon. She looked out over the skyline. The city slept, quiet and soft, wrapped in mist. Every building glowed faintly under the rising sun. No golden veins, no pulses, just light, pure and still. She closed her eyes and listened. The wind moved through the air vents below, steady, even, alive. The same rhythm she had come to know by heart. His rhythm. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small object, a piece of metal she'd found on the floor of the abandoned warehouse days after the incident. It was part of a heart monitor casing, twisted and burnt, the faint letters E. Ward still etched into it. She ran her thumb over the surface, her eyes glistening. It wasn't for nothing, she whispered. You wanted them to keep living. You did that. A single tear slid down her cheek and fell to the rooftop, vanishing into the cracks. The morning light caught it, turning it briefly into gold. Below, the first siren of the day echoed through the waking city. Soft, familiar, alive. Leah smiled, turning toward the hospital entrance. The elevator dinged softly as she stepped inside. The lights inside flickered once, twice. She laughed under her breath. Still here, huh? She said softly. The elevator doors closed. The hum rose faint, rhythmic, like a heartbeat beginning again.